Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading from UPSC Civil Services examination perspective. Today, let's take up the important news appearing in today's Hindu newspaper and also important news which appeared in the explained section of Indian Express from last week. Let's take up this news appearing in the explained section of Indian Express, and the news is titled Road to Net Zero Status. So here we need to understand about net zero status and also the long-term goals and also the short-term goals which was agreed upon at the Paris summit. So it says that at the ongoing COP27, that is Conference of Parties 27, India outlined its plan to achieve net zero emission status by 2070. So obviously we need to understand what is this concept of net zero. So net zero simply means the amount of greenhouse gas which is produced on the earth through anthropogenic emissions, that is human induced emissions, and the amount of CO2 which is removed from the atmosphere. So it is a balance of greenhouse gases which includes carbon dioxide which is produced from the earth, and also the amount of these greenhouse gases which are removed from the earth. So it says that net zero refers to the balance between amount of greenhouse gas produced and amount removed from the atmosphere. So this is the meaning of net zero, and obviously different countries have taken various steps in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now last year in 2021 at the COP26 in Glasgow, Indian Prime Minister introduced 5 important elements or 5 nectar elements to reduce global warming. And these 5 elements or Panch Amrit to deal with the challenge of global warming were: first, that India will reach its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. The second point highlighted was that India will meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. Third, India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now onwards till 2030. Further, by 2030, India will reduce carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. And last, by the year 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero. And these Panch Amrits will be an unprecedented contribution of India towards climate action. So regarding achieving net zero emission, just like India, other countries also place their targets. And China has set a target of 2060. Whereas for the developed world, the target is to achieve net zero by 2050. Now look into these two questions asked by UPSC in the prelims examination of 2016. The question is, the term intended nationally determined contributions is sometimes seen in the news in the context of. Options were A. Pledges made by the European countries to rehabilitate refugees from the war-affected Middle East. B. Plan of action outlined by countries of the world to combat climate change. C. Capital contributed by the member countries in the establishment of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And D. Plan of action outlined by countries of the world regarding sustainable development goals. Obviously, the correct answer here is B. That is, plan of action outlined by countries of the world to combat climate change. So here in a nutshell, let's understand some of the important aspects regarding Paris Agreement of 2015. So under the Paris Agreement, member countries decided to set up short-term goals and also long-term goals. And under the short-term goals, which was to be submitted by every 5 years by member countries, the countries need to provide for specific action that they intend to take to reduce carbon emissions for the period of 5 to 10 years. And as of now, member countries have submitted NDCs, that is nationally determined contributions, up to the year 2030. And these are the list of nationally determined contribution as submitted by India. And these contains lists of updated India's NDCs under Paris Agreement for the period of 2021 to 2030. The first point mentions about a mass movement referred as LIFE. And the LIFE campaign was also introduced during the Glasgow summit. And here LIFE stands for Lifestyle for Environment Today. Now here the Prime Minister of India also focused to change our lifestyle from mindless and destructive consumption pattern towards mindful and deliberate utilization. And his campaign to change our lifestyle can revolutionize various sectors such as fishing industry, agriculture, wellness, dietary choices, packaging, housing, hospitality, tourism, clothing, fashion, water management, and also energy. So, changing our lifestyle can also lead to reduction in emission in a significant way, and this can be done by changing our consumption patterns. And based on this understanding of life campaign, it has also been introduced as a part of NDCs. So it says that to put forward and propagate healthy and sustainable way of living based on traditions and values of conservation and moderation, including through a mass movement for life, that is lifestyle for environment, as a key to combat climate change. The second NDC mentions about to adopt a climate friendly and cleaner path than the one followed till date by others at corresponding level of economic development. Now, emissions intensity is defined or calculated with respect to the amount of greenhouse gas which is emitted for every unit of GDP. That is, for every unit of growth of GDP, the amount of greenhouse gas which is emitted. Now, growth in GDP also means that a country is growing in terms of its manufacturing, in terms of its industrial activity, and for all these purposes, it is utilizing energy. And in India, the industries are mostly coal dependent, particularly the industries of cement, steel, and iron ore. So, it is in this regard the Government of India intends to reduce emissions intensity of its GDP by 45% by 2030. And emission intensity is defined as total amount of greenhouse gas emissions emitted for every unit of GDP. Now, this emission intensity also counts emissions beyond those related to energy, such as emissions from agriculture and also greenhouse gases beyond carbon dioxide. So, it also includes emissions of methane. And this emission intensity is different from energy intensity of the economy, which is the amount of consumption of energy with respect to its GDP. So, energy intensity is measured as to how much energy a country uses to generate wealth, which is obviously measured in terms of its GDP growth. India's third NDC is to reduce emissions intensity of its GDP by 45% by 2030 from 2005 level. Fourth NDC is to achieve about 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based energy resources by 2030 with the help of transfer of technology and also low-cost international finance including Green Climate Fund. Fifth NDC is to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through additional forest and tree cover by 2030, as this will help to absorb greenhouse gas emissions including carbon dioxide. The next NDC mentions about enhancing investment for adapting to climate change in development programs in various sectors which are vulnerable to climate change, particularly agriculture, water resources, Himalayan region, coastal regions, health and disaster management. The next NDC is to mobilize domestic and new additional funds from developed countries to implement the above mentioned NDCs. And lastly, to build capacities, create domestic framework and international architecture for quick diffusion of cutting edge climate technology in India, and it also calls for joint collaborative research and development for future technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So these are India's updated first nationally determined contribution, which has been submitted by the Government of India under the Paris Agreement. Now, talking about the long-term goal under the Paris Climate Agreement, it did not provide for any specific target or any specific strategy to reduce emission. And other than the concept of long-term goals and short-term goals, which is to be achieved by member countries, no concept of mid-term goals was agreed upon. So, under the long-term goals, countries must submit their strategies to reduce carbon emissions. However, no specific timeline was provided for the countries to submit their strategies as to how they will reduce their carbon emissions. So it was expected that countries will submit their plans by mid-century, that is by 2050. And now net zero target has been associated with this concept of achieving the long-term goals, whereby India intends to achieve net zero by decarbonizing electricity and transport sectors, which will be done by reduction in the use of fossil fuel to generate electricity and at the same time increasing the share of renewable energy for generating electricity. And decarbonizing of transport sectors will take place by increase in the usage of electric mobility, as it will also reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. Other measures which will be adopted by India includes redesigning our urban spaces, increase in energy and material efficiency, revitalization of forest, and also push for climate oriented research and development. Now, this push for climate oriented research and development and also the other measures to achieve net zero will definitely require mobilization of funds or mobilization of finances. And funds will be mobilized both from the private sector, public sector, domestically, and also internationally. So, coming to the other part of this news, which says that what are the sectors that India will focus on to achieve net zero emission. So, we have seen the areas on which India will focus upon. But an important area of agriculture is missing. So, it says that why does a key area, that is agriculture, finds no mention in the plan. So, let's understand about this idea as to why agriculture does not feature in the measures given by India to achieve net zero. Agriculture is practiced by more than 60% of Indians, and agriculture is one of the major source of methane emission. And methane is one of the most dangerous greenhouse gas, as its capacity to trap heat is 25% more than carbon dioxide. And other than CO2, methane is the second most greenhouse gas. So it is important to remove methane from the atmosphere along with carbon dioxide. And other sources of methane emissions are animal rearing, burning of fossil fuels including crops, coal mining, wastewater treatment, and methane is also released during decay of organic matter in wetlands. So, overall, reducing methane offers greater benefit as it traps more heat. And despite these concerns, India did not join the global coalition on methane reduction, which was agreed upon in the Glasgow summit. So, this article effectively highlights the concerns that it is difficult to reduce greenhouse gas emission if we only focus on reducing carbon dioxide. Hence, the focus should also be to reduce methane. Further, there is also a need to apply technology driven carbon capture and storage mechanism. Now, carbon capture and storage mechanism is a way of reducing carbon emissions from the atmosphere. And carbon capture and storage is a three-step process. And these three steps are: first, capturing the carbon dioxide for storage. So CO2 is separated from other gases which are generally produced in industrial processes, such as CO2 produced at power generation industries or other steel or cement factories. The next step is transport of such stored carbon dioxide. So the CO2 which is stored is then compressed and transported via pipelines, through road transport or even ships, and it is transferred to a particular site for their storage. And the third step is that finally CO2 is injected into rock formations deep underground for permanent storage. And the storage techniques are being explored and researched all over the world. So having these technologies will require substantial international support with respect to innovation of carbon capture and storage, with respect to technology transfer, to ensure that climate finance is transferred from developed world to the developing worlds, to ensure capacity building, and also to improve upon existing negative emission technologies. Now, as of now, the negative emission technologies can be classified into two groups. First is bioengineered solutions, and the next is natural climate solutions, which basically calls for reforestation, that is, planting new trees which were initially cut down. And bioengineered solutions call for direct air capture as one of the methods. And the second method is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So these are the nascent technologies which are being explored world over. And once these technologies are implemented, then these technologies must be transferred to the developing countries so that they can also capture their carbon emissions. However, the concern is that this international support for innovation, technology transfer, climate finance, capacity building, and also having new negative emission technologies is very difficult to achieve. Now, based on our discussion so far, these two news appears in today's The Hindu newspaper. Then this news appears in the FAQ section on page number 11, and this news appears on page number 13. So this news on FAQ is that what is India's future strategy on emissions? Is the use of nuclear power and hydrogen critical for India to transition into a carbon neutral economy? Beside the use of electric vehicles, what are some of the other plans on the anvil to help the country achieve net zero by 2070? So basically this particular news highlights about India's long-term low carbon development strategy, which was also highlighted by India's environment minister, which underline India's right to an equitable and fair share of global carbon budget. Now here it's important to understand this idea of global carbon budget. So a carbon budget is the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide emissions permitted over a period of time. So it calculates the emissions over a period of time. So carbon budget is best depicted through this particular cube. And on this cube, this particular axis defines time. As you can see, the time is 2050 and it ends at 2100. And this permission of CO2 emissions over a period of time has to be done within a certain temperature threshold. And this temperature threshold is with respect to various sectors which produces these carbon dioxide emissions. Now if you look into this cube along this line, then it mentions about various greenhouse gas emissions including carbon dioxide and also other emissions including methane or nitrous oxides. The fourth point into this carbon budget is the share of fossil fuels which are used. And as you can see, the different fossil fuels are, for example, coal, oil and gas. And the fifth point highlighted on the carbon budget is added carbon capture storage and net negative emission technologies, which we have already discussed. So this is a proper visualization of the carbon budget. And India's long-term low carbon development strategy mentions about maximizing the use of electric vehicles, ensure that by 2025 the percentage of ethanol blended with petrol increases to 20% from existing 10%, making a strong shift of passengers who are currently using private vehicles to public transport, and this shift is also with respect to the freight vehicles. Further, India has also highlighted to improve energy efficiency through these efforts, namely Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, and this PAT scheme is an emission trading scheme. And under this scheme, such industries who are more carbon intensive or who have high greenhouse gas emissions, they have to reduce their emission. And such industries have to reduce their emission by a fixed amount or buy energy saving certificates if such industries have exceeded the greenhouse gas emissions. The next long-term low carbon development strategy for India is to expand its national hydrogen mission and also increase electrification and also enhance material efficiency and also recycling. So these are some of the long-term low carbon development strategy which has also been highlighted by India's environment minister. Now this article also highlights the concerns with respect to India achieving net zero by 2070, basically with respect to its long-term goals. So the first concern obviously is the aspect of climate finance, and it highlights about failure of developed world to transfer $100 billion annually to the developing country, which was agreed upon earlier. Further, European Union is also planning to impose carbon border adjustment tax. Now this topic we have already seen on 17th November 2022, and this can also be said to be a dampener, and it can result in green barrier to trade, particularly for such industries having high carbon emissions. And the issue of compensating the most vulnerable countries facing the brunt of climate change has also not been finalized. So apart from these concerns, these are the additional concerns which have been highlighted in this article appearing in the FAQ section on the Hindu newspaper. Now let's take up this news appearing on page number 13. And it says that India's power units binge on coal. That is, India has exceeded its consumption on coal and has also outpaced Asian countries. Now this increase in consumption of coal was basically because of heat wave in the last summer and also because of economic revival after the COVID pandemic. So it's not only India whose coal consumption has increased, particularly for its power generation or electricity generation, but even European Union's consumption of coal has increased after the Russian-Ukraine war because it has disrupted the energy supply chains for European Union. So in our list of concerns to achieve net zero or carbon neutrality by 2070, we can definitely add another set of concerns which has emanated from Russia-Ukraine war and also because of successive disruptions because of climate change. So Russia-Ukraine war not only disrupted supply chain for Europe, but this has also led to increase in energy prices and also increase in the consumption of coal. Now the problem with respect to increase in consumption of coal even by the developed countries is that it will lead to greater greenhouse gas emission by the developed worlds as they were not dependent on coal earlier prior to the Ukraine-Russia war. Now talking about India, as we have already discussed that because of excessive heat wave in the summer and also due to economic revival after the pandemic, this led to increase in energy demand and this also led to increase in import of thermal coal which is used for electricity generation. So this particular news appearing on page number 13 highlights that output of coal-based power plants have increased by 10% for year-on-year basis for the period of March to October. So we are producing more electricity as compared to last year, and this is mainly because of heat wave and also because of increased industrial activity which was not taking place last year. Now this news further highlights that India's surge in coal consumption from March to August period is 14 times faster than the average of Asia Pacific countries. So it also means that industrial activity taking place in India is much more as compared to the other Asian Pacific countries. However, its impact is yet to be determined with respect to achieving net zero by 2070 because increase in electricity generation, which is a carbon intensive industry, will lead to greater greenhouse gas emissions. And even for countries of the European Union, they have increased their consumption of coal for electricity generation. So it says that their coal-fired power output grew at a rate faster than India. And this was mainly because of Russia-Ukraine war, which led to disruption of energy supply chains. And countries of European Union also had to reduce their dependency on Russian energy supplies. So these set of concerns can also be added as an impediment or as a challenge with respect to achieving net zero by 2070. Now let's take up this question asked by UPSC in the prelims of 2016. The question is, with reference to agreement at UNFCCC meeting in Paris in 2015, that is Paris Agreement, which of the following statements are correct? First, the agreement was signed by all the member countries of the UN and it will go into effect in 2017. No, this statement was incorrect as all countries did not sign the agreement. Second, the agreement aims to limit the greenhouse gas emissions so that the rise in average global temperature by end of century, that is by 2100, does not exceed 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This statement is correct. Third, developed countries acknowledge their historical responsibility in global warming and committed to donate $1,000 billion a year from 2020 to help developing countries to cope with climate change. First of all, this statement is incorrect because it was not $1,000 billion annually, rather $100 billion annually. And so far, this aspect of climate finance still remains a bone of contention as the developed countries have not yet implemented this aspect which was agreed upon during Paris Summit. So the question here was select the correct answer using the code given below. So the correct answer here becomes B, that is 2 only. So based on our comprehensive discussion on this topic, this becomes your practice question for your mains examination. The question is, examine India's short-term and long-term low-carbon development strategy to achieve net zero by the year 2070. What are the impediments which needs to be addressed by all stakeholders cumulatively in the effort to save the climate from catastrophic disasters? And this question carries 15 marks. I hope after our discussion, you will be able to attempt this particular question. Thus, these 3 news appearing in the explained section and also in today's Hindu newspaper becomes very important from the perspective of both your prelims and mains examination and gets covered under the section of environment under GS paper 3. With this, let's take up the next news for discussion. Now let's take up this news from the explained section of Indian Express, which says that importance of agri-exports and what government can do to boost India's farm trade surplus. Now let's look into this particular statistics. It says that India's agricultural exports have grown 16.5% year-on-year basis in April to September. and it is set to surpass the record $50.2 billion achieved in 21-22 for the period of April to March. Now, despite this promising statistics, the concerns is growing import in Indian agricultural, particularly with respect to edible oil. And if we specifically look at edible oil, then it has become India's fifth biggest import items after petroleum, electronics, gold, and coal. So the concern highlighted in this article is that despite growth in agricultural exports, import of certain agricultural item is also growing. And this growth of import in agricultural products at a faster rate or at a sharper rate is further reducing trade balance. Now, trade balance here refers to agricultural export minus agricultural imports. So in this backdrop, this news highlights that India's agriculture exports are growing and could hit a new high this fiscal. However, imports are growing faster, driven in large part by vegetable oils. A focus on domestic production and new technologies can help boost farm trade surplus. And this topic of importance of agricultural exports gets covered under GS paper 3, particularly under major cropping patterns in various parts of the country, transport and marketing of agricultural produce and issues related to constraints, e-technology in the aid of farmers, and also issues of buffer stocks and food security. Now, if we look into these statistics, then overall it highlights that India's agricultural exports is increasing. However, if we look specifically with respect to year 2013-14 and if we compare this with the year 2021-22, then we find that the trade balance has reduced, as agricultural surplus, that is exports minus import, for the year 2013-14 was $27.72 million, and this has reduced to $17.82 million for the year 21-22. As despite the fact that agricultural export has increased substantially, despite this, even agricultural imports in terms of trade value has also increased. As you can see, for the period of 2021, agricultural import in terms of $1 million was 21.65, and this increased to 32.42 for the period 2021-22. So overall, we can say that trade balance, that is overall agricultural export minus agricultural import, has reduced. And this is mainly because of increasing agricultural imports for different agricultural import items. Now let's take the example of cotton and also spices. And if we look at cotton, exports have collapsed as compared to April 2021 and 2022. So cotton was exported worth $1.1 billion for the period April to September in 2021. But for the same period in 2022, the exports crashed down to $436 million only, whereas imports in cotton have surged. As for the year 2021, it was below $300 million. But for the same period in April-September 2022, it has increased or rather surged to $1.1 billion. And because of this, India has become a net importer of cotton. And another major reason for India becoming a net importer of cotton is lower domestic production of cotton bales in India. Another example is that of spices. So it says that traditional plantation spices such as pepper and cardamom, and for these two we have become both exporter and importer as well, as India's positions has been outpriced and also replaced by countries such as Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Indonesia and Brazil for pepper, whereas India has also lost market share to Guatemala for its export of cardamom. Another agricultural product for which India has become a net importer is cashew. As for the year 2021-22, exports was worth $453.08 million, whereas import was a staggering $1.26 billion. And if we look at the statistics for the first 6 months for 2022 itself, then the imports of cashew itself has reached $1.4 billion, and this is only for first 6 months. So these are some of the agricultural products for which India overall has turned into a net importer, and this is also narrowing down India's agricultural trade surplus or agricultural trade balance. Now the question is that what is the importance of trade surplus, especially in agriculture? So it helps to earn foreign exchange for the country, and at the same time it also improves farmers' income. Further, surplus trade in agricultural, that is extra export as compared to import in agriculture, sets off trade imbalance in other areas. Now, this is also important because India's deficit in merchandise trade account has increased from $76.25 billion for the period April to September 2021 to a staggering $146.55 billion for April to September period of 2022. So, surplus in agricultural trade helps to counter or set off deficit in India's merchandise trade account. So, considering these concerns of increasing imports for various agricultural products, the Government of India has recently taken few important decisions, and these decisions are to increase minimum support price for mustard, as it has been increased from rupees 5050 to rupees 5450 per quintal for the period 2022 to 23 crop season. And this will also incentivize the farmers to grow more mustard. So the idea is to increase production of mustards domestically. Another important decision taken by the government is to provide clearance for commercial cultivation of GM mustard or genetically modified mustard. Now DMH 11, which is the GM mustard which has been given clearance by the government, will help to increase yield for mustard production, and it will also make the plant pest resistance. And further developments in technology will lead to new mustard hybrids with improved yield. So the whole idea is to increase domestic production of mustard and also to make the crop pest resistance. And the same suggestion has been provided with respect to cotton. As in the present circumstances, India has become a net cotton importer. So this article has suggested that new hybrids of genetically modified cotton must be developed in order to further increase its yield. Thus, this topic of importance of agricultural exports and also concerns regarding increasing imports of agricultural product becomes important both from the perspective of prelims and also mains examination under GS paper 3. This news appears on page number 8, and it says that Andaman and Nicobar seeks GI tag for Nicobari Hodi Boat. And the Geographical Indication Registry at Chennai has received an application from the Tribal Development Council of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now this topic of GI, that is Geographical Indication, is very important, particularly from your prelims perspective. As you can see, two questions have been asked previously in the year 2015 and also in the year 2018. Let's take up this question asked in 2018. The question was, India enacted the Geographical Indications of Goods Registration and Protection Act 1999 in order to comply with the obligations to. Options were ILO, that is International Labour Organization, IMF, UNCTAD and WTO. In this, the correct answer is WTO. So in order to comply with the directions of WTO, India enacted the Geographical Indications of Goods Registration and Protection Act of 1999. Now this question asked in 2015 was based on which of the following have been accorded the geographical indication status. Options were first, Banaras brocade and saris. These are silk based saris having the work of zari. Second, Rajasthani dal bati churma, and third, Tirupati laddu. Now in this, Rajasthani dal bati churma has not been accorded a GI tag. So ruling out option 2, the correct answer becomes C, that is 1 and 3 only. So in this news, we need to understand about the Nicobari Hodi Boat and also the grounds on which GI tag is given. So here, first of all, let us understand about geographical indication, and then we will look into the Nicobari Hodi. So geographical indication is a sign used on products that have a specific geographical origin. So a specific geographical origin is important. And in this case, the specific geographical origin is Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So the product which wants to have a GI tag must have a geographical origin and must possess qualities or reputation that are due to that origin. So based on this, the Nicobari Hodi highlights that this is a Nicobari tribe's traditional craft. It is an outrigger canoe very commonly operated in the Nicobar group of islands. Now mentioning more about GI indication, it says that in order to function as a geographical indication, a sign must identify a product as originating in a given place. And in addition, the qualities, characteristics, or reputation of the product should be essentially due to place of origin. Again, the place of origin for Nicobari Hodi is the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So it says that the technical skills for building the Hodis are based on indigenous knowledge inherited by the Nicobaris from their forefathers. And the Hodi is built using either locally available trees or from nearby islands. And its design varies slightly from island to island. And to make these Hodis, trees are cut in specific design as well. So coming back to geographical indication, it says that since the qualities of the product depend on geographical place of production, there is a clear link between product and its original place of production. Further, geographical indications are typically used for agricultural products, foodstuffs, wine and spirit drinks, handicrafts and industrial products. And since India is also a member of WTO, hence it has enacted the Geographical Indication of Goods Registration and Protection Act of 1999 in order to comply with the WTO rules. So this topic basically becomes important from your prelims perspective. Now, as of now, application is yet received. So let's see whether GI tag is given to Nicobari Hodi Boat or not. Now in the comment section, you can tell me that which was India's first product which received the GI tag. Let's take this news appearing on page number 8. It says Pratham, which is an NGO, gets Indira Gandhi Prize for its work in education. Now Pratham, which is an NGO, focuses on education of children, vocational training, training of vulnerable children, and also focuses on research and advocacy to ensure rights of child. And the work done by Pratham as an NGO to ensure education for children, especially after COVID pandemic, has helped it to earn the Indira Gandhi Prize for its work in education. Now, as you can see that a question in 2015 in the prelims was asked. The question was Indira Gandhi Prize for Peace, Disarmament and Development for 2014 was given to which one of the following? The options were A. Bhabha Atomic Research Center, B. Indian Institute of Science, C. Indian Space Research Organization, and D. Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. In this, the correct answer was C, that is ISRO. So these type of questions can be asked in the prelims examination. However, what is important here also is the role of NGO which it plays. And this topic gets covered under GS paper 2, particularly from the section of governance. As you can see, the topic under the syllabus is development processes and development industry, role of NGOs, SHGs, various groups and associations, donors, charities, institutional and other stakeholders. And let's look into this question asked in the mains of 2021 in GS paper 2. The question was, can civil society and non-governmental organizations present an alternative model of public service delivery to benefit the common citizen? Discuss the challenges of this alternative model. This question carried 15 marks. And this year itself, UPSC again asked a question on donor agency in GS paper 2. The question was, do you agree with the view that increasing dependence on donor agencies for development reduces the importance of community participation in the development process? Justify your answer. And this question also carried 15 marks. So we understand that this topic of NGOs and donor agencies becomes important. So on this note, it's important to understand about donor agencies and also about the work done by NGOs. So overall, we can say that NGOs play an important role and are key drivers of intergovernmental negotiations, which ranges from various issues regarding regulation of hazardous waste to global ban on landmines. They promote legal reforms, pushes government to undertake important reforms through legislations affecting rights and services for vulnerable sections, helps in capacity building and also fill development deficit in diverse sectors such as health, education, environment awareness, social inclusion, skill enhancement, etc. It helps to alleviate poverty and also hunger. Steps taken by NGOs reduces governance gaps and also supplement electoral democracy by updating governments regularly of public opinion in favor of certain issues or concerns, and also concerns on certain welfare schemes. NGOs and civil society ensures community participation by raising awareness on important national, regional or local issues, as it helps to strengthen participatory democracy in India and also makes people more aware about the issues at hand. It helps the government to understand the challenges faced by the various industries, as the Ministry of Finance also organized sessions with FICCI, IFCI to understand their various concerns and challenges in different industrial sectors. Now, good work done by different NGOs also leads to competition among the civil societies, and this overall benefits the society at large and proves beneficial both for the citizens and also for the government. It provides a platform for vulnerable sections to raise their voice, example concerns of prostitutes, LGBT, HIV victims or victims of custodial torture, manual scavenging, etc. It ensures women empowerment by providing livelihood measures to such women. And voluntary sectors also bring fresh perspective and ability to develop alternative solutions. So these are some of the important role played by NGOs and civil society organizations in developmental process. Now, apart from important works done by the NGOs and civil society organization, there are still certain concerns as well. So based on these concerns, let's look into this question asked by UPSC in 2022 in GS paper 2. The question was, do you agree with the view that increasing dependence on donor agencies for development reduces the importance of community participation in the development process? Justify your answer. So as an introduction, you can say that institutional donors such as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Azim Premji Foundations, they have contributed towards the social sector such as COVID vaccination, contribution in education in rural areas, skill development, aspiration district program, etc. However, fundings for NGOs have also increased through corporate social responsibility funds, and these additional fundings have created additional problems including reduced community participation. So here you can also explain about community participation. That is, increased dependence on funding by donor agencies also reduces bargaining capacity and community participation, because these donor agencies also attach certain conditionalities based on which the funds can be utilized. So community participation is an important tool to mobilize community resources, as participation is viewed as a facilitator to sort any differences in the planning and implementation stages, speed up process of implementation, and also to complement and supplement the efforts of respective NGOs. However, there are certain concerns because of increased funding by these donor agencies, as it results in loss of agencies, which means that the NGOs are governed by the conditionalities which are set upon by these donor agencies and are no longer independent to take their decisions. So it says that funding by donor agencies come with its own set of conditionalities. Erosions of state's responsibility, because welfare initiative in the social sector is the responsibility of the state under directive principles. However, because of increased spending by these donor agencies, these welfare activities are mostly undertaken by the NGOs. It further mentions about self-serving attitudes or agendas of NGOs, as increased funding from donor agencies ensures financial autonomy to NGOs, and additional amount is further utilized to suit one's agendas. And because of this, the government of India has tightened the FCRA regulation with respect to foreign funding for NGOs. The next concern is siphoning of funds, as number of instances have been witnessed of siphoning of funds where funds are received on paper but misused for agencies' individual purposes. The next important concern is elite capture of NGOs, which means they often function as agencies for glorification of individuals and not for the work which they have been assigned to. Another set of concern is that some NGOs have been involved in misuse of foreign funding received under FCRA, and this was also highlighted by India's National Security Advisor. And NGOs cannot be said to be truly democratic, as they represent very small section of society, including those who fund their functioning, including the donor agencies. So overall, we can conclude by saying that thus there is a need for balance in funding by donor agencies along with community participation to ensure overall development of vulnerable and marginalized sections of the society. Now, this can be said to be a model answer for this particular question. However, you can come up with a better answer as well. So in this topic, you also need to understand the mechanism, the functioning of NGOs and various donor agencies, important work which is done by the NGOs, and also certain concerns in the working of NGOs and civil society organizations. With this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you for watching DNS. And if you like our effort, then please like the videos, subscribe to our channel, and also press the bell icon to never miss any video lessons from Rao's IAS.